Hello, everyone. This is what your pastor didn't tell you. Today, I am on with Outi Lehtipuu, if I pronounce that right, and we're going to be talking about the resurrection of Christians in the debate in the early church. And there's really interesting things going on because you have one group that says the other person's view is a bunch of heretics, and then you got the other group that says that group is a bunch of heretics. So there's this really interesting debate and back and forth going on between different groups, and trying to figure out what the original takes are, which is really fascinating. So, how are you doing today, Dr. Outi?
We are good. I hope you are good too.
Awesome. Yes, I'm very excited for this. Okay, so could you just give us a 5 minute summary of the debate, just real quick, get people's just a little taste of what the differing views are, and regarding the debate of just this idea of resurrection and early Christianity.
Okay, this may be a mission impossible, so my 5 minutes may take 15 minutes, but let's
Okay.
try. So, so I mean, maybe just to begin with, to take one step back, just to remind us that when we talk about early Christianity, so the first few centuries
Right.
of the Christian movement, whatever we want to call it, it was a diverse movement. Christianity did not. Uh, it did not appear as a package,
Mm.
something that, let's say, Jesus gave to his disciples and they would then hand over
Right.
to their followers and so on and so forth. But even the very basic and core elements of Christianity, they developed over centuries of
Mm.
time. And the question of resurrection, and by resurrection here I mean mainly resurrection of the dead. So, what would happen to people after they die? That was one of the topics that was really hotly debated. So people would discuss, obviously, what it means to be a Christian, what is this thing all about. And there were no kind of structures that we have today. There was no church organization. There wasn't even a the Bible. There were books, there were texts that were treated as authoritative, but the
Mm.
boundaries were not there. So
Mm.
there was kind of no benchmark to kind of test and to uh, there was no kind of a universal or general organization that
Mm.
would say, you are right and you are wrong. Okay, so this is kind of the background. So there were different early Christian groups. There were different early Christian teachers. They would all call themselves Christians because they all thought that they were the true believers of
Mm.
Jesus. And but they disagreed on what would happen after the death or after their death. And why? Well, I would say that people would, all Christians, all followers of Jesus would think that life continues after death,
Mm.
and it continues with God. Well, some people would not be resurrected at all, or then they would be judged and not live longer.
Mm.
But yeah, this was kind of uh, this was what people agreed on. But then what resurrection actually means and what it entails, that was hotly debated. So
Mm.
whether it is, this same body that we now have that would survive death and or be newly created, recreated, and
Mm.
continue life, or whether it was something more spiritual. And for some people, uh, it was like a metaphor, and the Christian teaching, the earliest
Mm.
Christian teaching that we have in the New Testament Gospels was diverse, and had different emphasis on this question. So, for example, in the Gospel of John, Jesus says that whoever believes in me has already passed from death to life.
Mm.
So, I mean, even though we are not in this view, even though we are not yet physically dead, we are kind of divided into those who have been resurrected, who truly live namely
Mm,
the believers, and those who are not believers, who, even though they appear to be living like we all are, they are actually dead. So it's kind of a metaphor for being spiritually dead or alive.
mm,
And so this was one way of envisioning what resurrection is about. So it's not about the physical death and surviving, or what happens after the physical death. But for many it was. But then the question really was, first of all, when would resurrection take place? Immediately after the death of an individual. When I die, do I immediately pass somewhere, or then would it be a general resurrection?
mm,
So kind of at the end of the world, everybody will be resurrected at the same time and face the judgment and so on and so forth. So we have all these different kinds of traditions in the what the early Christians would call the apostolic tradition. So
mm,
so in the biblical texts, and yeah, and so these were the issues that really then were discussed.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, so you kind of hinted at it. There, we even have texts where they take this metaphorical view, which I guess today many people would see as like really bad or like, oh yeah, we definitely are going to resurrect and we're going to have our own, I guess, soulish bodies, or
Hmm.
we have our
Hmm.
own views about today, our traditional views. But then the people that like, if we look at it back then, we would say, oh, that's not the right view. But then they would also cite from Paul,
Hmm.
and it's like, well, I mean, of course, anybody can cite from a biblical text as just justification. They can find anybody can find their own view in an ancient
Hmm.
text like that.
Hmm.
But it's just really fascinating that someone so close to Paul, living
Hmm.
at that time so much closer than us, and then would be so confident about that, but so different, and then even willing to call other people heretics and all that kind of stuff. Just really, really fascinating. So I'm really excited about this one. So
Yeah, the if
mhm,
I
sure.
may pick that up, yeah, the and in the question of resurrection, Apostle Paul famously wrote or talked about the spiritual body,
Mhm,
that the resurrected body is a spiritual body,
right.
and that's very ambivalent, or it can be taken in at least in two ways. So those who thought that, okay, resurrection is more of a spiritual thing, it does not involve this flesh, as the early Christians said,
Hmm.
when they talked about this body that we have now, they would call it flesh. But then those who then promoted the resurrection of the flesh, this flesh, they would say, yeah, but Paul talked about body. He said that it is the body that will be resurrected. And so we can say that they were both right or they were both wrong, whatever way you prefer. But this is what it is always about biblical texts. It's about interpretation. We do not know what Paul actually meant when he wrote that, when he wrote about the spiritual body. Maybe he didn't mean much at all. Maybe, for me it's not very interesting to try to speculate about what he really thought about it.
Hmm.
What I find much more exciting is how then later people would understand his words,
Hmm.
both in the early Christian centuries, but also today.
Hmm.
That's fascinating, because that's kind of what I mean. The biblical text, it's just words on paper if we don't do anything with them.
Hmm. Right, 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 right. So as we're getting to this idea of like deviance, the word you use in your papers, so this idea of like, hey, someone that is, I guess, outside the faith or not one of us or not a true Christian kind of idea. Um, so for me, as I'm looking at this discussion, like, there's all kinds of different views on like heaven and hell and universalism or all these other different types of views of what
Mm,
happens after we die. But when I look at this debate and everybody's, calling each other heretics and stuff like that, I'm like, is it really that serious? like is it really that, I guess, fundamental to the faith?
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever get that when, before we really dive into it, I was just curious, I wanted to ask you about that. Do you ever feel like oh, they were taking this way too seriously, or do we know why they were taking it so seriously?
Yeah.
It's not like somehow if it was a metaphorical resurrection that
Mm-hmm.
like Jesus didn't rise from the dead or something like that, or however you want to interpret that.
Mm-hmm.
Is What
Mm-hmm.
do you think about that?
Well, I think this is the exact question why I began to study
Oh, really?
this whole topic, because what uh, uh, when reading ancient sources,
Mm,
I was struck by two observations. The other one was that the debate seemed to be really harsh, so people they would not actually call themselves heretics. Heretic is or let's say that this word you know uh, um, appears a little later, but
okay.
they would say that you are of the devil.
Oh.
You are satanic. So it's so really really harsh polemics was
Yeah.
going on, but still the differences seem to be so uh, small.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody was talking about the resurrection. So my question was exactly what I heard you just ask, that why take this so seriously? Why couldn't they all agree that, hey, uh, great, we will never die. We will resurrect. We will always be with God. But they did not. They really made, I would say, a really big case of very, very small
Hmm.
details. And my answer, which is a partial answer, I'm sure, there are no simple
Mm-hmm.
answers to very complex questions.
Yeah.
But I think part of the answer has to do with identity, and this is where the idea of deviance
Mm-hmm.
came to me. That again, when we imagine the situation where the early Christians found themselves, they were always in the minority. They were minority communities in the big world, so to say. And and they were only building up their identity as a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
As I already said, the question was, what does it mean? How should I live my life? What should I
Mm-hmm.
believe? And so on and so forth. And they did not have kind of ready answers for that. And so the question of identity, and also who belongs, who is one of us and who is not,
Mm-hmm.
became really important. You have to know who we are. You also have to kind of differentiate yourselves from the others. So you always need also the other. And this is something I think that is just a very general social psychology.
Mm-hmm.
It does not only have to do with early Christianity or so, but so what I call deviance, I think it has kind of a double role to play. On the other hand, it's something that is that you need to avoid, so that to save your integrity, to that that we are all more or less the same, or
Mm-hmm.
let's say similar enough to one another. On the other hand, the deviant tell us what we do not want to be.
Hmm.
So I mean, it's always, when you say who I, or when you try to describe who you are, it's always easier actually to say who I am not than to say who I am. So you really need the other to kind of as a mirror for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
to know, or to somehow describe who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And these Christians, and this is kind of my at least partial answer to the question why the question of resurrection became so important. Those who taught the resurrection, but using slightly different wording and
Mm-hmm.
phrases, they were a threat in the sense that it was not quite sure if they are one of us, or if they are outsiders. So they threat the boundary.
Mm-hmm.
You need a clear boundary so that it both encompasses the insiders and then excludes the outsiders. But
Mm.
those who are kind of who talk about resurrection but seem to mean something totally different than what we wanted to or how we understand it.
Mm.
Are they one of us or not? So here comes the kind of the why it is so important, or also why the polemics is so harsh, that
Mm.
they are really, they are not one of us. They are not, they don't belong to God, they belong to Satan, and they are really trying to upset us
Mm.
and try to especially kind of the weaker members of our community. It's also interesting how many ancient writers seem to be really worried about those who who do not know as much as we do, but who kind of the little sheep that they need to somehow guard from these
Mm.
outside deviants.
Yeah, yeah, that's really, really fascinating, and I think that's a wonderful point, and we do it even today, where we are just like super hostile to people that are much more similar compared to the people
Hmm.
that are just like, like say hypothetically, like the Christian and the atheist, like
Hmm.
almost always will be much more hostile to the Christian that is
Hmm.
just a little bit different than us compared to the atheist. It's a wild idea, but.
Absolutely, and
Mm.
because the those who are really uh, outsiders that
Mm.
are really different from us. I mean, they can be geographically far away from us,
Mm.
or mentally, or whatever. But since they are totally different, there is no kind of confusion, and you can just ignore them. I mean, of course they are wrong, but it's easy to show that they are wrong because they
Yeah,
are so different. But
yeah.
the people who are close to us, and I mean, uh, the those who have studied the Gospels and the life of Jesus, for
Mm.
example, many claim that actually Jesus was very close to the Pharisees. They were both they had ideas of the law, and
Mhm.
how what is the right type of or the right lifestyle. And so they quarreled. So that's why Pharisees are always represented as the kind of the enemies of Jesus, because they are so close, much closer than the
Mm.
Sadducees, for example.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't think about it like that. Yeah, that's fascinating. So, just continuing. So, one of those examples of these groups in the early church is the Nag Hammadi writings. So,
Mm.
don't want to spend too much time on exactly what it is, but could you just give us a little description, dating, time period, location, what they're generally about? What are the Nag Hammadi writings?
Okay, in 2 minutes. The Okay, Nag Hammadi writings is a collection of early Christian texts that were unearthed in Egypt in the
Okay.
1940s, and the reason why they are also, from my perspective, really interesting is that they seem to represent a type of Christianity that was suppressed, and that was really put into the margins. So maybe I come back to the word heretic. When we say that somebody is a heretic, or something is heresy, uh, we need, first of all, we need, I think that's part of a power play. We need people who are in power, who have the power to label others as, you know I mean, as heresies are those who are wrong. So
Mm.
we need people who say we are right, and I mean, and of course, this kind of who is wrong and who is right, this kind of debate was going on from the very beginning, but only after we have the power structure. So the kind of the universal church, and we have the bishops, and we have the Roman Empire backing up the church. We have people in the position that they can really say, you are heretics, you are doomed, you really do not belong. uh, but to label someone a heretic, that really, first of all, it entails power, but it also entails hindsight, because so when we are talking about the earliest centuries, as in I do in my studies, so second, third, maybe fourth century, we still, there is no one who can say, especially, universally, that somebody is a heretic. But but of course we have attempts. We have writings of the so-called church fathers, like Irenaeus, for example, who describes groups that he calls Gnostics, and many of the things that he describes seem to be, or the Nag Hammadi writings seem to represent this type of Christianity. But I would not call Nag Hammadi writings heretical writings. I would just call them Christian writings, because that is their self-identification. In many, I mean, it's also, there are more than 50 texts, so it's also a diverse collection. But in many of them, they are clearly Christian texts. They also lean on the apostolic tradition. They talk about the Savior, and they are interested in the same questions than other early Christian texts. And what is really fascinating is that in some of the texts they are very polemical against the views that then became the dominant views as Christianity developed. So that's why they are really absolutely fascinating writings, because they kind of represent the so-called other side. So views that are that might seem strange to us, because they did not kind of then survive in the when Christianity really developed into what it became.
Interesting. And do we have a specific date of when they were written?
Well, that's extremely well. We know that the manuscripts are from the 4th century.
Okay.
But but when the texts themselves were written, we do not know. So they were found in Egypt. They are all written in the Coptic language, which was the language of the Egyptian Christians. But we do not even know whether they were originally written in Coptic. Or let's say they are texts that we know were originally written in Greek. There is a longish quotation from Plato, for example, and the Gospel of Thomas, for example, is one of those texts. That we also have fragments of the text in Greek, but then other texts might have been originally written in Coptic, and so and many of the texts that we have, or that belong to this collection, we only know through this find. So we only know this one manuscript, and so it's impossible to kind of give them a larger context. We do not know if they were known in different parts of the Christian world, or whether they were just very locally produced texts. And I would suggest that my best guess would be that it depends. That they are texts they are texts that were more widely known, and then they are texts that maybe were not so.
Yeah.
But who wrote them, who copied them, who who read them, we do not know, unfortunately.
That's really fascinating. Yeah. Okay. And the topics, we don't need to go too much in detail there. Just general topic. Of course, they talked about resurrection. You mentioned they talked about like views on Genesis. Did they have any other popular topics that they mentioned there?
Well, they very much, well, they talk about salvation. They talk about the creation of the world. They have, in many texts, they have a very different interpretations of the creation stories. Many texts seem to represent a view that they are, that our world was created by a creator God who is a lower divinity, and then there's the supreme God. So actually, the creation of the world was, if not a trespass, at least a kind of a misunderstanding, and kind of the salvation. Salvation involves that you kind of you acquire a salvific knowledge. But as I say, it's a diverse collection of texts. We cannot say that there's just one view of something, and so maybe but there are a few texts that really talk about resurrection. There's one text that is called the Treatise on the Resurrection, and so it's a fascinating text. It's a difficult text, very obscure. It's not easy to kind of make sense of. But it is, as the name says, it is a kind of an essay on the question of resurrection. It's written in a form of a letter, and there the teacher, or the writer of the letter, whom we do not know who that is, teaches. Teaches what resurrection is about, and this is absolutely a Christian text. He mentions Paul. He quotes Paul. He quotes the Transfiguration story. But then the view he has on of the resurrection is very different from the resurrection of the flesh, or different. Yeah, I would say different, even though, and this is what I find, maybe if I need to say the most fascinating thing about this text, it is this, and that is that he talks about the resurrection of the flesh, but he seems to understand it as something else than the recovery of this body that we now have. He talks about kind of an inner flesh, or inner members and outer members of a body. So, and it is only the inner members that then resurrect. So actually, so I would interpret this as it is something, our inner self that will resurrect, and this earthly body that we now have will not survive death. So this is actually a very different view than the one that we have, for example, in the Christian creeds, the Apostles' Creed, for example, where we say the confession that we believe in the resurrection of the flesh.
Yeah. So that was kind of my next question. So what view did the Nagadi Writings? Did they have a specific view on resurrection? Did you want to add anything more there? You kind of got into it already.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I would not say, or I think it's impossible to say that the Nag Hammadi writings have a certain view. There are lots of writings that do not say anything about the resurrection, but those writings that I have studied, for example, this treatise of the resurrection, seems to really hold a view that when a person dies, the soul of the person is kind of drawn immediately to heaven. So kind of this is there's no kind of a general resurrection that awaits us all, but the resurrection happens immediately after death, and then, as I say, it is some kind of an inner self, not this body. Even though the phrases and the language that he uses sounds like he would be talking about recovering our body back. And this is and what is really exciting is that then we have texts where, for example, I also already mentioned Irenaeus, who was a bishop in modern day France, and then there was a in Carthage, so that is North Africa. Tertullian was a very prolific writer, and these two where they were really um, they promoted the idea of getting our earthly body back at resurrection, the fleshly resurrection.
Mm.
And they, especially Tertullian, in at least two of his writings, he complains that they are people who uh, uh, try to trick our people. So again, this we and them kind of language. So they are those, outsiders who try
Mm.
to trick our people, talking about the resurrection of the flesh. But
Mm.
but this is not, even though they say it so, this is not what they mean.
Gotcha.
And it's very unlikely that Tertullian would have known this Nag Hammadi writing. At least,
Mm.
Tertullian wrote in Latin. This writing we have in Coptic. But to me it says that these ideas were much more widely spread than
Mm.
just locally.
I see. I got you. Okay. And maybe you haven't, maybe we don't have any writings on it. Maybe we do. But someone asked about in Thomas's experience of touching Jesus physically. Do we have
Hmm.
any comments on that? Because I guess
Hmm.
some people today would say, hey, it seems like it's pretty clearly physical in some way if he
Hmm.
could have touched it. Did anybody
Hmm.
comment on that then?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. And yeah, I mean, before we started this interview, when we were still chatting privately, we were talking about the question of the resurrection of Jesus, and
Uh,
then the general resurrection, and kind of their linkage
yeah.
between. And so I mean, of course, they are kind of the same thing, and but then it's actually it's not very straightforward. But here this. Uh, the different gospels and different gospel traditions
Mm.
have a somewhat different views on the you know what the resurrection body of Jesus was like. And I mean, and I would say so this encounter of Jesus and Thomas, this is in the Gospel of John. But I would say that the Gospel of Luke is actually the Gospel where the physicality of the resurrection body is uh, highlighted.
Mm.
And even though, I mean, in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus eats fish, for example, just to show that, he is a fully resurrected human body.
Mm.
At the same time, he can appear and disappear like that. So, I mean, in some sense, it is not the same body that he had before his
Mm.
death.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, as we know, we cannot walk through locked doors.
Mm.
But to come to Thomas and this Thomas touching Jesus, actually, what is interesting is that it's a little bit ambivalent whether Thomas touches Jesus or not. I think that this story is most about identification. That
Mm.
Thomas had said that he does not believe that Jesus has risen if he doesn't see, and then he sees Jesus, and Jesus invites him to touch him, to the wounds on his side, and so it's kind of, since I have these wounds here, I am the one who died on the cross. But the gospel writer does not say explicitly that Thomas is touching Jesus.
Mm.
Maybe it's the words of Jesus that suffice. And Thomas, because then Thomas said, "My Lord and my Savior," or whatever
Mm.
the words are in English.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not saying that if the point had been that he did not touch, the gospel writer would have said that explicitly too. But it seems that since there is no comment on the actual touching,
Mm.
it seems to me that it's not so much about the whether the body is physical and
Mm.
tangible and whether you can really actually touch it or not. It's much more about the identification,
Mm.
because just before this Thomas episode, there is the episode of Mary Magdalene on the tomb, and there Jesus explicitly tells her, "Do not touch me." And this is of course, of course is something that you should never say. Nothing is of course when you are talking about well, any topic. I think nothing is self-evident. You really so, but this was also something that the earliest commentators that we have in the second, third, fourth century, they paid attention to this. That why is Mary forbidden to touch, and then Thomas urged to touch, and then they gave somewhat different answers to this, and some took it as a gender question, some took it as a Mary having encountered Jesus too early, so kind of the process of resurrection was not yet complete. And then Thomas met Jesus 1 week after, so then it was okay. But then we also have the story in Matthew where the women who come to the tomb, they encounter the risen Lord themselves, and they touch his feet. So again, we have different traditions. They don't all play very well together, and they were somewhat challenging for the later generations of Christians then, who tried to make sense of all these diverging traditions.
Right. Yeah, so there's enough ambiguity in the text where any position really could have come to their own conclusion, just like we see in Paul, where they're almost quoting the same text and come to different views. That's really interesting. Right. So let's see here. Okay, so we talked about resurrection, the Nagadi Writings. So in the treatise on resurrection, so it's a specific text, the writer cites from Paul to show how the views are correct. I guess we kind of talked about that. Could you just give us some quick examples, or talk about that, about how they were quoting from Paul?
Well, this is actually a bigger question that you perhaps
Okay.
understand, because the ancient manuscripts, the ancient texts that we have, they don't have quotation marks, for example. They don't even have full stops. They don't in the earliest manuscripts. They don't even divide between words. It's just one continuous writing. So the fact that we don't have texts like that anymore, that's kind of the most basic interpretation, that we have to figure out where one word ends and the other one starts. Well, in most cases it's not very difficult, but so how do we know that somebody's quoting from another text? Well, sometimes, and very often, and for example, in this treatise on the resurrection, this Nagadi writing, the author himself says, uses some phrase like, "as the apostle says," and then comes a quote. But what is interesting is that sometimes there are no such markers, and then the question is, does he know that he is quoting? Does he assume that his readers will know that he's quoting? Or is he kind of saying the same thing that Paul or someone else in the tradition said, and kind of claim it his own? We don't know. We don't even always know the answers. But this short text, the Treatise of the Resurrection, it really it's full of the same vocabulary that Paul used. It's really it seems as if the author tries to think like Paul, and I'm sure that he he thought that, okay, I know what the resurrection is all about. I know what Paul wanted to say about it, and now I'm kind of writing this to you. And he is also polemical toward others. So he says that there are many who wish to know what resurrection is, but they have all gone astray. And he says that he represents the word of truth, which is kind of interesting, because this seems to be a stock phrase that we find in many texts also including some of the New Testament texts that people say that I represent the word of truth, even though they might represent very different views. But it's this polemical rhetoric that was really typical of the day, and maybe not only that day. I think even today we have many people who say they represent the word of truth, and and then the other, they don't, when they say something else.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah. And can you talk about how this writer was polemical, if you want to add anything there? How he saw some views as right, others as wrong.
Well, he is not kind of listing different views and kind of attacking them in detail or anything, but it's just his style of saying that, I and we know what the truth is, these others don't. But he is not very detailed about those views that he is
Mm,
opposing. But it's we kind of have to reconstruct those views more on what he claims himself.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. The fun thing about those conversations, I feel like, especially in the other early church fathers, is that you've got people that are almost citing other views, and oftentimes they'll even get the views wrong.
Hmm.
And which I guess is that's expected because
Hmm.
we do that today too. But it's like, well, of course you're rejecting it. You don't even know what the view is. So
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
that makes it even more
Yeah.
difficult.
Oh, absolutely. And then if we think of the writings of these so-called church fathers or these early Christian theologians, they they can be very polemical, and but we don't know. So we only have these so-called hostile sources for some groups, for example,
Hmm.
and then deep down we don't even know if these groups ever existed. Because if that's really just a constructed enemy.
Yeah.
But for this reason, for example, the Nag Hammadi writings are so important and
Yeah.
fascinating that they showed that they were actually Christians who represented the views that
Mm.
many of these hostile sources are attacking. But then maybe it might be interesting for someone to know that, for example, if I'm think of this Tertullian, for example,
Hmm.
he wrote five-part book against Marcion. Marcion was one of these kind of arch heretics
Yeah.
of the early church, but Marcion had been dead for almost 200 years. No, sorry, not 200 years, but Marcion was had been dead for decades before Tertullian wrote. So but when part of his polemical style is addressing Marcion directly, saying, "Oh, you wretched Marcion, how can you say something like this?" But Marcion was never reading his stuff because he had been dead for decades then.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay. So what about the testimony of truth? So I guess that's part of the Nag Hammadi writings. What kind of ideas does it
Hmm.
teach?
Hmm. Yeah, that's another text from that collection. And unfortunately, it's a very fragmentary text. So for example, the most interesting things that it has to say about the resurrection are partly lost. So I mean, by fragmentary, I really be, it's in fragments. There's a lot of text that is impossible to recover. And the and so I mean, this is, as the name implies, it's a testimony of truth. Again, you can almost hear it's a polemical text because yeah, this writer again, uh, he says he's representing the truth,
Mm,
and your resurrection is just one. Uh, it's not his kind of a main concern, his main topic. But he also does talk about resurrection, and there he but as I say, unfortunately, what he says is partly or we cannot recover it, but he seems to be very polemical against the idea of the resurrection of the body. So he says that those people are they have really gone astray. And what is interesting is that there he cites from the Gospels the story or the controversy between Jesus and the Sadducees over resurrection. You might remember it. The Sadducees come to Jesus and try to trick him by saying that there was this woman who had married 7 brothers. I mean, one after another, and they all died. And so, whose wife will she be in the resurrection? And Jesus teaches that there's no marriage in resurrection. But this same story is in 3 of our New Testament Gospels, Mark, Matthew, and Luke. And in Mark's version, Jesus says, you are lost. Now, I'm sorry, I don't have the text in English in front of me, but kind of my free translation would be that you are lost, you have gone astray, because you do not know scriptures nor the power of God. And this is what in this writing called the Testimony of the Truth. In this text, the writer says, or quotes this one, that those who say that this earthly flesh will resurrect, they do not know scriptures nor the power of God. So yeah, he's but obviously he does. So
right, because he has the truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
and so you, and that was written, I guess, the same time period as the other Nag Hammadi writings, or generally.
Yeah.
Okay, and then did you get into the resurrection yet? Was there any differences there on their view of resurrection compared to other views in the Nag Hammadi writings?
Sorry, so where differences between the Nag Hammadi writings and
no, like the Testimony and Truth, and maybe the other texts we were thinking about earlier.
Well, yeah. Well, the so kind of among the Nag Hammadi writings, if they were, I think, or that would have been so interesting to know. For example, when also in the Testimony of Truth, the writer also says or uses the same stock phrase that that he is standing in the word of truth, literally. So would he have said that the whoever it was who wrote the treatise on the resurrection, or the Gospel of Philip, which is also one of the Nag Hammadi writings that has some interesting stuff on resurrection, whether they would see themselves as on the same side, as whether they would belong to us and not to them, we don't know. Obviously, whoever collected these texts together read them, and so for him or for that community, and we do not know who those readers might have been, but for them they seem to represent the same thing, because but that's how it is. If we think of the Bible, or the different texts in the Bible, there is a lot of diversity, as we already briefly spoke. Also, for example, on the resurrection. But generations and generations and generations of Christians have read all these texts, and people tend not to kind of put John against Paul, but they think that, okay, they are talking about the same thing, it's the same stuff. And so people just read it so that it seemed to all seem to be smoothly and nicely, neatly together. That's how we do,
right? Because of course they can't contradict it, of course. Well, that's the common phrase, at least. But anyway, so you have the I guess you could say the Testimony of Truth. So it's very polemical. you talked in your paper about how it participates in labeling deviance and defining social boundaries. Did you have anything else you wanted to add on to that?
Well, I might be repeating myself, but yeah, I mean, this is how I kind of figured out why this the whole issue of the resurrection was so important.
Mm,
That I mean, not for all Christians. I mean, I would say that the common Christians would really not see any difference, but it was those who produced these texts who
mhm,
were and again, in many cases we do not know who they were, but
mhm,
who kind of, they were got kind of gatekeepers, or they for them it was important to kind of set very clear boundaries. And that is and then this the question uh, of uh, uh, of the resurrection
mm,
kind of became a kind of a shorthand, could I say, or a really a boundary marker. I mean, if we take an analogy from today, and it is they are never kind of 100% good analogies, but I mean, I mean, I'm sure, I mean, I'm from Finland, and in our, let's say, in our debates today, and
mhm,
I'm sure that it's the same, and maybe in the scale is much bigger in out there in the States. But if you meet someone who says he or she is a Christian, and if you say ask, what do you think about the same-sex marriage,
mhm,
and then you would know, oh, if that person belongs to us or to them. So I mean,
mhm,
I think that in every time we have these issues that kind of are used as a kind of a marker, that I mean, not everybody wants to listen for 1 hour of a discussion on the resurrection. So it's much easier if you say, well, resurrection of the flesh or not, and you say yes or no, and you say, and then oh, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with him
right,
anymore, kind of. So I mean, I'm doing putting this in oversimplified terms,
mm,
but kind of deep down, it has to do, it's kind of a test case, whether one is a genuine Christian or not.
mm, right,
And
right,
as I say, for me at least, I think it would be difficult to imagine that in a modern day religious community,
mm,
be it Christian, Jewish, whatever, that people would really fight over the question of resurrection. But we know that people fight over, as I say, same-sex marriage. People fight over all kinds of identity political things. People fight about ordaining women or not. People
mhm,
fight about we just have different topics, but I think that the fights are more or less the same. And people, and I'm a biblical scholar, so what is fascinating for me is to see what kind of a role the biblical texts play in these debates. And as you have said several times, Zach, I think people, it's possible for people with very different views to kind
mhm,
of find backing from the text that they deem authoritative.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I guess in your paper you say that it calls other people foolish. Let's see. Um, I guess in your paper you said in scholarship they are often taken as Catholic teachings, but I guess it's not as clear in those texts what the other views are. Let's see here. Let's see if there's anything else. Any quote specifically?
Yeah, you're talking about the testimony of truth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Truth now, yeah. Hmm.
yeah. That's okay. I'll link it in the description afterwards here. I don't think it is in right now, but you guys should definitely check out those papers that OT has written here for us. So let's see what else we have here. Yeah, Irenaeus's views. So anything you want to add there as far as his views on resurrection? I would assume that his was the more traditional view.
Well, maybe traditional from our point of view,
You're right.
but when we go to the really the first the formative centuries of Christianity, we we do not. It's in many. Oftentimes we do not know what the actual situation is in different places, and again, it may have varied locally. But for example, we don't. I mean, Irenaeus, his view is kind of the winning view in the sense that this became over centuries. This became a dominant view, namely that the this earthly body will also survive after death, or God will create the body anew, however people would formulate that. But resurrection is not only does not only entail the soul but also the body, and this is his view, and so Irenaeus' view, but we don't actually know what the situation was when he wrote, whether that was a minority view among Christians or not, uh, because his rhetoric, he uses different kind of strategies, and one is that he says that you know all over the world this is what Christians teach. So kind of this is the because everybody teaches this must be right. But then at other times he kind of says that, okay, we are the small flock, we are the we who have the truth, we are kind of a small minority among or within the hostile world or whatever. So it's not easy to well, it's absolutely not possible, or it's impossible to say anything about numbers in any case. But so this is, and really the or if I uh, well, kind of how I envision this whole question of the resurrection of the body or not. Uh, I think it is a question of no matter how you envision resurrection, there are kind of two different aspects that you have to take into account. The other one is continuity. The other one is change. So there needs to be some kind of a continuity. I mean, if there is not, then how can I say that I will be resurrected? If it's just some kind of a totally altered thing, then it's not me, is it? But then if it's me just like this, like I am now, well, first of all, then we have all these questions that, okay, will the resurrection body resemble my body now, or when I was 17, or or the moment when I die, or
Right.
and I mean, these may seem like naive questions, but these are actually questions that the early Christian authors take up, and they discuss these, and so what most of them teach is that, okay, it is this body, but it's a perfect body. So it is kind of our body in a perfect form, because we will be in the divine sphere. So that's, of course, it's a world without sin, without any deficiency, and so on and so forth. Well, this kind of a view then has really interesting kind of implications. I mean, what is a perfect body? Will I have a double chin or not? And this, of course, the kind of our ideas of uh, what kind of a body is the most beautiful, the most perfect. They vary over time. I mean, 100 years ago, the fatter you were, the better, because that meant that you had enough to eat. And
Mm.
nowadays, it's all, in at least in our Western world, it's the opposite, and so on and so
Mm.
forth. This has really also important consequences in respect to disabilities. Do we
Right.
really want to think or teach that a perfect body is an abled body? It's also a huge discussion within biblical studies, and
Mm.
how the ancient worldview often saw all kinds of disabilities as unwanted,
Mm.
which then from our modern or our present day perspective is let's say problematic, to say the least.
Mm.
And so, I mean, if we teach that the continuity in resurrection means that it is this body, it is still somehow changed. So there is this kind of balance that needs to be kind of hit between sameness and
Mm.
change.
Yeah. Yeah, for
And
sure.
they are both there. And I think that the Apostle Paul, to go back to him, I mean, he kind of uh, he had this genius a metaphor of a seed and a plant. When you sow a seed, it is something totally different than the plant that then comes up out of it.
Mm.
And he says, the seed is our body, this earthly body, and then the plant is the resurrection body.
Mm.
But then on the other hand, if this is a seed of wheat, for example, what springs up is also wheat. It's not barley, for example.
Mm.
So there is also the continuity aspect, even though the appearance is totally different.
Mm. Yeah, that's fascinating. So, uh, Irenaeus has some interesting views on the creation of Adam. So, you wrote a little bit about that. So, this, I guess, idea of the difference between Genesis 1 Adam and Genesis 2 Adam is a little different, right? Uh, maybe I'm not saying that correctly. Could you comment on that just a little bit? How, because if I remember correctly, you said that that view of Adam kind of plays into um, how they viewed resurrection. Is that right?
Well, the yeah, creation and resurrection. Uh, yeah, they are, or let's say, creation is also a very important aspect in the resurrection discussions, because for many the resurrection was kind of a recreation, and this was also kind of part of the I would also say the resurrection apologetics, that if somebody said that resurrection cannot happen because it's impossible. What is scattered around and dissolved cannot be
Mm.
resurrected. And then the kind of um, the answer to this challenge was that God can do anything. If God can create Adam out of nothing, or out of the clay, or whatever, uh, why couldn't he then recreate us in resurrection?
Mm.
So in this way, the creation story is also part of the creation narratives, and the and and also in the debates over the resurrection and over the survival of death. It's the different answers are partly, or can be explained by, kind of different anthropological views. That what is it, and I think these are questions that we still ask.
Mm.
What makes me me? I don't know why am I? Or is it just kind of my intelligence, or
Mm.
my beautiful soul, or whatever, my inner light? Or
Mm.
how much is this body kind of part of me, or that I am what I am because
Mm-hmm.
of, because my body looks like this and not something else. And I mean, I think it's this fascinating question that because I mean, uh, you know, my mother-in-law passed away just about half a year ago, and when I saw her lifeless body, it was somehow clear that she was not there anymore. I mean, she kind of looked herself, and but somehow how it was not her anymore. It was just her body. But at the same time, so I think that you need the, whatever you call it, spirit or soul or whatever animates us. You need
Mm-hmm.
it. You need life in order to be, a human being, a living human being. But you also do need a body. I mean, we are not just kind of ideas or spirits or whatever. We are very much embodied human beings, and I think we need to take this seriously. Uh, I mean, while we live, and also when we talk about death and resurrection.
Mm-hmm. Uh, uh, so I have a little bit of time here. We're about an hour and 7 minutes in. Are you okay? I got a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
Okay. So, Tertullian, did he have any specific differences than Irenaeus or the traditional view? Was there anything interesting about his view of
Mhm.
resurrection?
Well, I mean, if we paint with kind of big strokes, yeah, he was on the same side with Irenaeus.
Mm-hmm.
He was also a very ardent promoter of the resurrection of the flesh, and his style was extremely polemical, and we have lots and lots and lots of his
Yeah.
writings, much more than from Irenaeus. So yeah, he was and what might be interesting in both of these writers is that they not only uh, taught the resurrection of the flesh. What they also believed in was the 1,000-year reign in an earthly paradise. So, and I think that these two views are also interconnected,
Mm.
because it's kind of logical that if you spend 1,000 years in an earthly paradise, you need a body. But then when we think of the developing Christianity, the resurrection of the flesh or the resurrection of the body became a very central element in the Christian faith. But then this idea of this millennialian, I don't know how you say this,
Millennium.
English. Yeah, thank you. So the idea of a 1,000-year reign of the Messiah, which appears in the Book of Revelation in the Bible, but nowhere else, it's it kind of disappeared from the kind of the mainstream teaching, at least. I
Hmm.
mean, we have always had kind of groups, kind of apocalyptic groups in the history of Christianity, but
Hmm.
the kind of mainline churches kind of forgot about that part of the teaching. But yeah, but maybe the one point that I'd like to make, if we are approaching the end, is that what I also find so exciting about this topic is that kind of the divisions and the dividing lines, they do not or they are not drawn between Christians and non-Christians,
Hmm.
but between different types of Christians. And most of, maybe all, but at least most of these writings, the early Christian writings that we have that have
Hmm.
survived, they are kind of insider literature.
Hmm.
They are aimed at a Christian audience, and so they are not kind of polemical against pagans or Jews, but they are polemical against differently thinking Christians.
Hmm.
Because and here again, I think that the reason why is that in this way they are kind of defining and testing what Christianity is really about. They are kind of inventing Christianity, if this is a little provokingly said, but they are constructing Christianity. Might be a more constructive way of saying this.
Yeah. Okay, and the Ophites, I don't think I've ever even heard about this group before. Did they have anything to add in that conversation of the resurrection?
Well, this is I would not really maybe I don't know if it's worth commenting on them so much, because this is an example of a group that we only know through Irenaeus's writings,
Uh-huh.
and we don't even know if such a group existed. But their view of the resurrection is different from Irenaeus, and he attacks them. But whether they really whether we can really say that such a group existed, it's impossible to say, and to really try to reconstruct their views on what Irenaeus says about them.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. And then Gospel of Philip. So that was part of the Nag Hammadi text, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And does that add anything interesting to the conversation, would you say?
Well, the again, it's resurrection is not a main topic there. It's but there are a couple of places where there are some comments over the resurrection, and what is again interesting is that the author uh, again seems to be talking about not only about the resurrection of the body, which was kind of more ambivalent, but the resurrection of the flesh, which meant that we are talking about this very earthly flesh that we are now in. But he seems to be interpreting it in a very spiritual way, and in this right, so he is absolutely of a different opinion than the so-called church fathers Irenaeus and Tertullian. So even though he is using their terminology, so to say, he has a spiritual type of understanding of the resurrection. And what is interesting is that he links it very closely to the Eucharist. Well, this is an interpretation. Some people would say that, or some scholars have also denied this, but I think it's obvious that he is talking about the Eucharist, and he says that the flesh that will rise is actually the flesh of Jesus that we consume in the Eucharist.
So,
So that's what he says. I'm not entirely sure if I understand what he means by it, but that is what he says. So somehow perhaps he thinks that the resurrection somehow happens and re-happens every time we are having a Eucharistic meal, or whatever it might be,
yeah.
or by the Eucharistic ritual we somehow become more resurrected. I don't know.
Yeah. It sure would have been nice if they gave more detailed explanations about their views on
Absolutely.
that. Yeah. But yeah, awesome. Thanks. This has been great having you on here. Thank you so much. Such an interesting topic. Everybody, make sure you check out the articles and her book and the description. Was there anything else you wanted to add there before we get going?
Well, I think after we finish, then I'm sure I have an idea that I would have wanted to share, but right now I can't think of it. Hey, folks, it's 5:30 here. It's been a really hot day, and yeah, so let's call it a day.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Well,
Thank
otherwise,
you, Zach.
we'll definitely have to have you on later. But otherwise, yeah, as I was saying, everybody check out her stuff. Really great stuff. Really interesting articles. But otherwise, yes, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you. You too. Bye bye.
Awesome.